Guess what's back? Business and Brews, where real business talk meets real people, and always fueled by a good brew. This time we're going podcast first, bite-sized, insightful, and built for conversations you'll want to share. I'm your host, Matt Pierce, founder and CEO of Immediate, and I'll be sitting down with leaders, entrepreneurs, and friends to talk about leadership, growth, and the stories that make business worth talking about. So grab your favorite brew, pull up a chair, and let's talk business the way it's meant to be talked about. Business and Brews, back, bolder, and better than ever. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Business and Brews. I'm your host, Matt Pierce, and today we've got Keith Melton, Senior VP of Product Commercialization for the Clearinghouse. Keith, great to have you here with me.
Great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited about this, man. I've known Keith now for probably 7 or 8 years. Have actually surfed behind his boat on Lake Lanier. It wasn't good, but I did it.
You did great, Matt. You did great.
And so we've known each other for a long time, and it's cool how the world just brings people together. I've gotten to know Keith really well over the past few years. And when we first met, and we'll talk about this, he was at the Federal Reserve, and now he's at the Clearinghouse. And Immediate works with the Clearinghouse to process a lot of our payments. And so it's been fun to kind of see friendships that turn into working relationships. And so I'm excited to talk about this a little bit today, Keith. I usually like to get kicked off just with a quick ask about what you're drinking. So if you've got a shout out for a brew, whether it's a beer or coffee or whatever you're having, we're in the afternoon, so I'm not going to judge you one way or the other.
Yeah, no. I'm definitely having a coffee this afternoon. And my daughter worked at a local coffee shop called Jittery Joe's in Athens. She's at UGA right now. So a little shout out to Jittery Joe's. It's a fun little coffee shop in Athens.
Awesome. Well, Keith, tell us about kind of your career journey and what has brought you to the Clearinghouse. I know, like I mentioned, I probably stole a little bit of your thunder, but you're at the Federal Reserve. You're now at the Clearinghouse. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done and what's brought you to here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually started probably more than 20 years ago. So I started my payments career with SunTrust Bank, which is now called Truist. And I was really fortunate. I got to help modernize a lot of different areas of the banks, anywhere from internet banking to mobile banking to consumer lending, mortgage. So I got to touch a lot of different areas of the bank and learn a lot about payments. That led to an opportunity where I moved to IBM and ended up working my way up through software group running the financial services, payments, and banking software business. So it's about $100 million P&L. I had the development team, software services, product management, that whole team. And one of my customers was the Federal Reserve. And so the right opportunity came along, and it actually got me off the road from doing way too much international travel. And I worked for the Fed for about 7.5 years. I was head of product management for the Fed. I ran all of the main products. So Fed ACH, FedWire Funds, FedWire Securities, FedLine, and their check product, everything but FedNow. And so I had product management, revenue management, pricing, and billing responsibilities for the Fed. And then, was at the Fed a little bit longer than I expected, but, was part of a very large modernization program where we modernized the ACH platform within the Fed, moving off of an old mainframe-based system to a modern distributed platform. And once we got through with that, then, this right opportunity came along with the Clearinghouse, and I've had a lot of fun. So I'm doing product commercialization. So that's go-to-market strategy, product marketing, sales enablement, working very closely with sales, very closely with marketing for all of TCH, the Clearinghouse products. So we have 4 primary products around ACH called EPN, the Electronic Payments Network. We've got a product around instant payments. So that's the real-time RTP, real-time payments. We also have a wire system called Chips, and we also have a check product. So just a little bit about the Clearinghouse and a little bit about my journey in the payment space.
Super cool. It's it's also fun just to kind of see how it all kind of came together. I don't think I knew all that, even though we've known each other for a while. I don't think I knew how you went from IBM over to the Fed. That's pretty neat. So one of the things I think is really cool about the Clearinghouse that listeners may or may not know is that it is owned by a consortium of banks, which is unique, right? Can you give us kind of a little bit of what that looks like and how that may or may not influence like overarching product strategy and how you guys operate?
Yeah, absolutely. So and the Clearinghouse has been around for a really long time, 1853. So we've been in business for over 170 years, and it's pretty much had the same mission and purpose the entire time. So, and much like the Fed, it's a mission-driven organization really meant to drive safe, reliable, efficient payments for the U.S. economy. And so we've been doing kind of the same mission for a long time. And right now, the clearinghouse is owned by 22 banks, but the ownership is really around governance, and that's what most people don't really understand. So there's a governance piece to the clearinghouse. So they provide governance for our products. We have what we call business committees, where we have representation from both owner banks and non-owner banks. And then we have boards that provide governance for our organization and kind of help steer us in the right direction to accomplish our mission. And I would say that's differs a little bit from our customer base, which is much, much broader. So with RTP, as an example, we've got over 1,200 banks that are on the real-time payments platform. We've got over 225 banks that use the EPN, that ACH product that I mentioned before. And so if you just think about strategy and kind of what drives our product and our product roadmaps, it's not so much the governance piece of it, the owners and the governance side of it, but it's really about kind of outside in thinking of what our customers need that drive what we do on a day-to-day basis.
That's super interesting. I'm also going to give you a little bit of U.S. history. When you said 1853, my mind immediately went to who was the president in 1853, and little known fact, Franklin Pierce, number 14. And there is no relation. I used to tell people all the time because he was often considered the most handsome president. But there is no relation, unfortunately. But I did wear number 14 in high school in homage to Franklin Pierce, the 14th president.
There
I
you
think
go.
I was really just trying to sell it that I was
You were
related to a
somehow
president.
related. Yeah, that's great.
Um, well, so let's talk more about RTP then. I do think it's really cool the way you guys are structured. And for us as an organization, RTP has been really helpful for people who are listening. As a earned wage access company, and we're essentially enabling people to access their pay as they've earned it in order to avoid, turning to predatory title or payday loans. And it's rare, it does happen, but it's rare that people are planning ahead for a financial emergency, right? There are times where people go, hey, I've got a bill due on Wednesday and payday's not till Friday. And so I'm going to go ahead and schedule this early. And so we give them discounted rates or free transfers to do stuff like that. But what typically happens is I'm in a bind and I need my money now. Right. And so this is where our partnership and being able to use the RTP rails to get money directly into their bank account. So, I mean, there are times where someone swipes a card at a gas station and is trying to put $100 hold on there. Maybe it's the day before payday or a day or two before payday. And there's just not enough there for the hold. And so they pull up the app and they go, I need to drop $100 in there. And then they swipe again and it works. Right. And so it's something that one, I will just say thank you for the partnership, because you guys are truly impacting the financial well-being and the financial health of the American workforce. And I know you're doing a ton just in general as it pertains to moving money, but that's something that is obviously really important to us. And so we're grateful for this partnership. I would love for the listeners to hear more about like what are the ins and outs of RTP, and what are some use cases that you see beyond what I just shared, but other ways that you guys are really creating an impact in the world?
Yeah, yeah. No, happy to give everybody a little bit more background on what RTP actually is. So about 8 years ago, we actually launched RTP, and it's the first new what I'll call rail. It's actually a payments network, the first one in 50 years in the US. And so prior to that, the newest payment rail was ACH, which launched in the 70s. And so, both ACH and RTP are what are considered retail payments. And so ACH are the traditional scheduled batch oriented type of payments. A lot of people refer to them as live payments because it's payroll, it's bill pay, it's electronic payments that happen in and out of your account. And there's a lot of those kind of transactions, a lot. And there's two operators. There's the Fed, and then there's the clearinghouse as the two operators that work with all the banks to do clearing and settlement between all financial institutions in the U.S. RTP is a whole nother beast. It's kind of the new kid on the block. Like I said, it just launched 8 years ago, and we have been seeing a lot of growth, but it's very fundamentally different than ACH in that it's not scheduled, it's not batch, it's all real time. So it's payment by payment by payment versus a file that has a bunch of batches in it, and those batches have a bunch of transactions. RTP clears and settles those transactions on a one by one basis in real time. And the other big difference is that the settlement happens before the funds are made available. And it's kind of a payments geeky detail, but it's really important in that it really mitigates risk, right? So
Mm,
there's credit risk when funds are made available before settlement happens. Sometimes settlement happens
mhm,
1 or 3 days later, but funds are made available instantly. And so financial institutions are taking on that credit risk by making those funds available. Some people
mm,
would say it's a small risk, but you add up hundreds of millions of transactions and those dollars become really big. And that risk
right.
becomes even larger systemically. With RTP, there is no risk because the settlement happens between financial institutions before the funds are
Okay.
made available, which
Yep.
all happens in typically under 5 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And we have
that's really
lots of use cases and lots of growth that's happening on RTP. Earned wage access is definitely one of them. I would say about 12% of the types of transactions on RTP are payroll, earned wage access, instant wage access related. And there's kind of 3 different flavors there. So emergency payroll, those are things that have to happen, and based on different states and
mhm,
regulations, they have to happen the day an employee leaves a company.
mhm,
Like, it has to happen immediately. Earned wage access is typically the employer integrated model where the employer offers it to the employee for an ATM like fee. It's employee paid, and then there's the instant wage, which is more the Ubers, the Lyft, the DoorDash is getting paid at the end of a gig. And there's a new model that's actually starting to take off, which is this direct to consumer model that the banks are really starting to adopt. I'm seeing a number of different pilots happening where the banks are offering this service, this capability directly, which is
mhm,
really interesting to me. It's growing pretty quickly. And then there's lots of other types of use cases on RTP that I see that the banks are offering products to, different their retail customers. So about 20% of the volume on the network is what we call consumer originated. So
mhm,
those are things like account to account transfer. So Keith moving money from my Truist account to my JP Morgan Chase account,
mm,
or it could be P2P type transactions. So some Zelle transactions settle over RTP. And so we see
mm,
some of those types of transactions also on the network. But the vast majority of transactions we see on RTP are what we call business originated. And so it's business to consumer. That makes up a good portion of the volumes. Think of like loan disbursements, insurance disbursements, those types of transactions on the network. We see a lot of merchant settlement. So think of like Etsy and people paying, small mom and pop merchants. We
right.
see a lot of that kind of transaction on the network as well. So yeah, it's new use cases popping up almost daily, and we see a lot of growth and a lot of volume. We actually just set another record. We're almost setting them weekly now, but we just processed over 2 million transactions in a single day, and
Wow.
it was about 8.5 billion in value in a single day.
That's incredible. That's really cool. Well, so I guess the question, look, this it makes sense, right? We are in a world where I want it now, I need
Yeah,
it now, and you guys building the technology, like wrapping the technology around that. The same way that probably if we go back, whatever it is at this point, probably 100 and 120 years when the first Model T comes out, and there's people, but there's still, I mean, here we are 120 years later and people still ride bicycles, right? There's value in
I ride
all of
bikes quite
these.
a bit actually.
Yeah, right. You're big into it. So some more than others, right? And so, like, can you give me an idea of in a day where you can now do things real time, like are there use cases where people, I mean, we obviously, I mean, I've got some at immediate, but I'd rather hear it from you. Like, what are some use cases of people continuing to use ACH versus using RTP in a world where everything's available
Yeah,
right now? Can you give me some of those?
yeah. So the easiest way to think about this is you know TCH built infrastructure for the banks to be able to move money easily, between financial institutions for their customers, whether those are businesses or their consumers. And so the characteristics of RTP is that it's final, it's irrevocable. It's instant confirmation of good funds. So as soon as it hits send, you're going to see it in your bank account instantly. It's 24 by 7 by 365. And it's credit push only, which gives the person sending the money all the control. Like, with ACH, you have both it's credits and debits. So you can authorize someone to pull money from your account. That's a debit.
Hmm.
Whereas with RTP, it's a credit push only. I have to hit a button saying, yes, I send this money to Matt. I don't, there's no way in RTP to let Matt authorize a pull payment from my account. if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so the characteristics of each network is a little bit different. And there are use cases that are fit for purpose for both. And I think both are going to continue to grow. I don't think one is replacing the other. Like I said, with ACH, you have debits, and there's a lot of instances where people want people to be able to pull money from their account. If it's a scheduled transaction, if it's something that happens reoccurring, it's a great use case for ACH, right? ACH is very cheap. It's been around for 50 years. It's very efficient, and the costs on those transactions are very, very low. With
Hmm.
RTP, if you need instant confirmation, much like a wire, but much cheaper than a wire, and you have rich data that you want remittance information in, RTP is a great vehicle for you to be able to do those payments instantly.
It's really neat, and I appreciate you breaking it down like that, because I do think I think there's a lot of people that are trying to understand all the different components, and to your point, different use cases and times when it makes more sense to use this over that. What when and obviously you work with a lot of banks, you interact with a lot. I know you're on a couple of different boards for like payments organizations that are work with community banks. When you work with community banks all the way up to the biggest of the big, right? What are some things you see and hear from an innovation perspective, and how do you see differences between the really big banks and the banks that are maybe community banks? Do you see differences in their speed to decisions? Do you see them being more technologically advanced depending on size? Are there things that you start to see, or do you feel like everyone's just kind of its own? Are there groupings you can do, or do you feel like everyone's kind of independent and think in their own way?
Yeah, we have, like I said, we have over 1,200 banks that are participants in the RTP network, and we have 94% of them are the small banks, right? And
Mm.
there's benefits for both small banks and large banks using this network. One of the things that we built out was I call it the RTP receive business case, and it actually helps quantify for banks what business value they'll get by joining the network. And what most people don't realize is all of these transactions are essentially deposits. They are deposits. And the way a bank works is deposits get turned into loans. Those loans get turned into revenue for the bank. And so by joining the network, you're going to be able to grow your deposit base, which is what all banks are fighting for, right? That deposit base, whether you're a big bank or a small bank. And
Hmm.
and so on the flip side, on the send side, banks that are sending payments through the network, we see both again small banks and large banks that are, I would say, innovating at different paces, and they have different segments of customers that they're trying to serve. And we see some very tech forward small banks that are all API enabled, and they have a very tech forward customer base that are putting really large volumes. I mean, larger volumes than some of the bigger banks in the country. But like I said, it's also early in its maturity curve. And so, I suspect, we'll see more and more banks continue to send. And,
How?
another good use case, going back to use cases for just a second, one of the biggest use cases we see are like digital wallet payouts. So if you think of the immediacy in wanting your funds immediately. Like there's no reason it should take 3 days. If you're trying to move money from my Venmo account or my PayPal account back down to my bank account, it can be done instantly. And within, 5 seconds, it shows up in your account.
Right.
We see a lot of those kinds of transactions.
Makes sense. So how do you in a position? I would assume I would assume that you probably get pulled in, especially with let's say you're talking to a financial institution who is thinking about adding RTP. I would assume that you probably have to balance creative discussions with, like, as a head of commercialization, like being in a position where you're also responsible for selling, right? How do you strike a balance of that? And I think and the reason I ask is because I do feel like there's, regardless of what industry you're in or what you're doing, um, to me, most good salespeople, and I'm bucketing here, but most good salespeople are solution sellers, right? You want to identify a problem and you want to provide the right solution. Unfortunately, some people get too caught up in the consultative aspect of it, and they just want to give away free consulting for months and months or years and years, and they
Yeah,
never actually get it to a point where we've now got a new client. There's others who are overly pushy and are too salesy and turn people off because they're just trying to push an agenda and they're not actually receiving what the
they're not
problem is,
listening. Yeah.
right? And so how do you, because obviously in the places you've been been successful, and you're now in a position where you get to have this kind of consultative role, but you are still, I would assume, still required to drive net new revenue. So how do you kind of balance, like find that right balance for those two pieces?
Yeah, I think this has kind of stuck with me my entire career. It's all about the value proposition of what you're trying the solution you're trying to deliver, right? So
Mhm.
with RTP, it's really easy to put together the materials to show and prove the value for not only the financial institution, because you've got to think about it like what segments are you trying to serve? What's the personas of those segments that are important for making decisions. And so if you understand the value proposition of who you're talking to, it goes a long way. So for financial institutions, we can talk about growing deposit bases and that deposit base turning into new loans. Those new loans drive new revenue. And it's an easy story to get banks to be able to join the network because it's going to drive new revenue for the organization based on those deposits. If it's a different segment that you're talking to, it's the corporates, for example, because corporates are the ones that are really going to be the senders, the originators of those transactions. You need to understand what's the value proposition to the corporates that you're talking to. And it's a different value proposition depending on who you're talking to, and you got to know your audience is the most important thing.
Yeah. I do think you're probably it's not unique, right? But you're in a nice position where there's a lot of publicly available information on financial institutions. And so you can go out and read the K's and Q's and be prepared as you're kind of going into some of these meetings. And that is a good place that I think you get to play in. And obviously with the kind of growth that the clearinghouse is experiencing, you guys are doing it right. So congrats on all the success you're
Well,
having
we have
there.
a long history, like I said, 172 years now of delivering value to our customers, which are the banks, and
Right.
that value translating into value for their customers, primarily the corporates and the retail customers. So I think that longevity, that history of delivering safe, reliable, efficient payment infrastructure goes a long way as far as credibility in the market.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll start to wrap it up here. Thoughts about the future? Anything that, not in general, that was a pretty broad question, Matt.
Yeah.
Thoughts about the future of payments and anything that you kind of see coming down the pike here, whether it's this year in 2026 or kind of looking forward over the next couple of years. What are things that you foresee?
I see the growth of more use cases. So if I think about things like tax refunds, tax rebates, we're starting to see a lot of growth in that space. People want those funds, those rebates, those refunds instantly. I think, HSA, FSA is another good example of getting disbursements in the healthcare space. So I see a lot of new use cases popping up, which is, I think, one of the really cool things with RTP and kind of being a new payment infrastructure for the US is like, it's going to drive a lot of innovation. It's going to
Right.
drive a lot of new ways of getting things done. And I think EWA is another example of that, right? It's a new way of getting things done, leveraging new technology. The other thing I see is, and I'm really excited about it, is the ability to use some of the newer technologies like machine learning and AI to help solve systemic problems around fraud, right? So in
Mhm.
the payment space, we always worry about fraud, whether it's authorized fraud or unauthorized fraud, scams. And I think there's a real opportunity. We actually just launched something in market just this quarter for it's a fraud solution for RTP, but we're also going to extend it later to ACH and wires as well. But I think the ability for some of these tools to process the vast amounts of data that we see, because you got to think about it, we're processing on behalf of thousands of financial institutions, and it's hundreds of billions of transactions a day and over 2 trillion worth of value every single day. That's a
Wow.
lot of data. It's a
Right.
lot of data. And if we can use smarter tools to help systemically reduce fraud for the country, that gets me pretty excited. And I think there's a real opportunity in that over the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, I appreciate the answer because the last thing I was going to ask you about was how you guys are leveraging AI and what you're seeing, and you just answered it. I mean, that's really interesting that you guys are leveraging that specifically to help reduce fraud. To your point, it's something we're regularly and consistently thinking about and trying to prevent, and so it's good to know that you guys are ahead of the curve on that.
And the one thing I will say is that the slogan of faster payments equals faster fraud is actually the data says otherwise, which is really
Right.
interesting. We're actually seeing as low as like 0.02 basis points of fraud which is
Wow.
incredibly low. I mean, any other network, I think the last stats I saw, check was about 17.5 basis points. ACH is about 5 basis points. Same with the card networks, it's about 5 basis points. And in RTP right now is 0.02 basis points. Very, very low.
Wow.
And so I think some of the rules that have been put in place, some of the new technology and tools that have been put in place can help really systemically reduce fraud for the country.
Right. Well, I can't tell you the last time I've written a check. So I didn't know that people were, I didn't know there was, ever since Catch Me If You Can, that movie came out, I was like, I don't think I need to be writing checks as much anymore.
That was actually one of my first projects at SunTrust. Going back to that
Really?
was, yeah, Check 21 happened during that time frame, and so it was the electronification of check because of 9/11, and that was one of the projects I got to be involved in at SunTrust, which was really interesting.
Oh, how cool. Somebody was telling me, gosh, I can't remember who it was. Somebody was telling me recently that they got to hear Frank, the real Frank Abagnale, not Leonardo DiCaprio. They got to hear Frank Abagnale give a presentation somewhere, and it was just fascinating. I should probably go do some YouTube searches and watch some of his stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Um, listen, Keith, and this was one. Again, I'll say it. Thanks for the partnership.
thank you.
We're greatly appreciative. Two, you've got the ability to take something that, in a lot of cases, can be dry or things that people don't necessarily understand, and like really boil it down and condense it and make it easily consumable. So I really appreciated this conversation. I think people that are listening, I'm sure they learned a ton and got a lot out of
Payments is one of those things. It's like plumbing. Like nobody wants to really understand how it works. They just want it to work and work reliably.
it. Right.
But at the same time, it's a space that's changing really fast.
Right.
And to me, it really is exciting because of all the innovation that's happening. And like I said, the first new thing in 50 years is pretty cool.
Well, it shows in the way that you're like your knowledge of it and the way you explain it. So thanks for doing that. I got a lot of value out of this. I'm going to put you on the spot. Last thing, when do you de-winterize your boat? And am I welcome back sometime this summer to come try to surf again?
Yeah, let's wait till it warms up just a little bit, but let's go out in April and we'll hit the waves.
Okay, I'm in. I got to redeem myself from the last time. I think I could do better.
Sounds good.
So awesome. Well, thanks, Keith, and thank you everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do, or as much as I did. And I plan on having another good one coming for you next week. So thanks for joining us on Business and Brews. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.